All right, good evening, everyone. It is Tuesday, March 19th, 2019. We are here on the cusp of spring, and we are glad to be here with you tonight, live from Athens City Hall. The first purpose of our gathering this evening is for a special called session to enter into executive session for discussion of real estate acquisition and/or disposal. And I'd entertain a roll call as first.
Here.
Parker. Leak.
Here.
Wright.
Present.
Denson.
Here.
Neesmith.
Here.
Edwards.
Here.
Harrod.
Present.
Thornton. Hamby.
Here.
We have 4.
All right, now that we have attained a quorum, I will entertain a motion to enter into executive session.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, please indicate. All right, hearing none, we will enter executive session upon conclusion of the agenda-setting meeting. Also entertain a motion for dismissal of executive session upon conclusion of that session.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, and so we will exit executive session before we exit the hall. We are now going to move to the agenda-setting session for this evening. These items, of course, will have no final action this evening, but we'll see final action the first Tuesday of April. And before I kind of move on, I have just one special activity that I need to move forward to for recognition. We, of course, are gathered here as elected officials and senior staff behind the rail. Many of us have served well as citizens, as elected officials, but I think it's true that there's no one in this room who's served as consistently or strongly or effectively for this government for nearly as long as Jean Spratlin. And so I am delighted to be here on this opportunity to celebrate 45 years of service to the unified government of Athens and our predecessor governments. And I couldn't be more excited to have you with us, Jean. If any of us are lucky, we might be here for 4 or 8 or 16 years. But I think you have outserved the group of us all together. So I would like to present you with this pin for 45 years of service to the fine people of this community. Thank you so much, Jean. Thank you.
I'd like to know how Jean is able to stay here for 45 years and not have anything to drink.
She's one of those self-sustaining.
Yeah.
And we are grateful for all your service, Jean. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. We're going to move forward to our agenda-setting session. If those of you who are interested would like to view the session live or post-session, you can visit ACCGOV.com, ACCGOV.com, and navigate to our meetings or view on Charter Channel 180. There are going to be several opportunities for public input, which I'll move into in a second. There's going to be an opportunity upon our consent agenda, an opportunity for new business and old business, and then individually opportunities for those activities that come as recommendations from our Planning Commission. We're going to begin with our consent agenda. Those are items number 1 through 7. And so I'd call to the podium anybody interested in providing public input on consent agenda items number 1 through 7 this evening. You have 3 minutes to make your comments. Jean expertly manages the clock, and so with 30 seconds remaining, the clock will turn yellow, and when your time is up, it turns red. Any consent agenda interested individuals tonight? The weather's good and everybody's out. Come on up. Just provide your name and address, and you may begin your comments.
All right, Brett Nave and 200 Plum Alley. I'm with Studio B&A Architects, and I just want to speak toward the, is this for the bigger projects like Baldwin, et cetera?
No, that'll be kind of toward the end of the evening. There'll be individual times for each of those development projects. No worries, Brett. All right. No more folks interested in speaking to the agenda set of items number 1 through 7. I'd like to ask members of the commission if they would like to remove any of those items from the consent agenda and move them to discussion. So I see Commissioner Harrod.
I would just like to take number 3 off
for some commentary, particularly if our attorney could explain what's happening here, because the state law that relates to this is not particularly clear, I don't
Okay.
think. I know that's a shock to a lot of people, but maybe our attorney can clarify what we're doing here.
All right,
And
so
then,
interest.
Then I'll be happy to put it back on.
Okay. Some little discussion regarding item number 3, our local fireworks ordinance. Commissioner Davenport?
I would like to take number 2 off and just have a little conversation about the deferred compensation board.
Okay. All right, number 2, any other interest? Commissioner Thornton?
I don't know if I want to take it off. On number 6, the Network for Southern Economic Mobility final report, that is just accepting the report, not to
That's correct. It doesn't direct
continue
staff
or
to
no
do any
money
activities.
or anything like that.
Absolutely correct. You want to just leave that on consent?
That's fine.
Okay. Commissioner Hamby?
Just number 5 for a quick comment when it comes in.
All right. Commissioner Denson?
I'd like to take off number 4, and then also just for a couple of questions, and then actually I would like to take off number 7.
Who's the mayor pro tem that put this together?
Commissioner Lake?
Say 7 as well.
All right. Going once, going twice. 1 and 6 remain on the consent agenda.
Vehicle net.
All right.
Okay, let's get comfortable, y'all.
We're going to go ahead and have discussion of those items that were removed from the consent agenda, and then we'll move forward to old and new business. So I believe Commissioner Davenport requested that item number 2, the defined contribution plan, Code of Ordinances, be removed. So you had a question about that, Commissioner?
Yes, just with, Blaine, can you explain how the board is picked?
Justin on this. Sure. By way of this particular structure, as outlined in the proposed ordinance, commissioner, the manager, HR director, and the finance director, as well as other employees, it follows a very similar structure that we currently have with our pension board, which Commissioner Hamby currently chairs. So it's a very similar structure. It's not wholly different than what we already have in place.
Okay, just by any chance, can B5 be changed to current employee participants, be designated by the manager? Can be maybe substituted, maybe HR director or the mayor?
I'm sorry, you said B.
Yes, on the attachment 1, B5 and 6.
What is this?
I guess I'll have to defer to the attorney's office that
Okay.
helped prepare this particular
Go
ordinance.
ahead.
That's purely a matter for this board to decide
Okay.
as to who would select those 2 employee participants. There's no legal basis for
Okay.
being the manager.
You just, for me, I just like somebody outside of the manager, no offense to the manager, since it's dealing with people's pensions and their finances, that I would just recommend maybe somebody, maybe the mayor could, or the commission could be able to pick 2 of those employee participants. And possibly the Athens-Clarke County resident.
Commissioner Denson?
Yeah, I did have a couple little questions. I guess one just wanted, I didn't see any concerns, but I just wanted to ask, just to be very clear and explicit, are there any potential ramifications to the county's pension system with these changes here?
No, sir. This is really just an organized way in which we have some, I guess, more oversight as it relates to, and also opportunities to communicate with employees as to what's happening with the current defined contribution plan. So that's what this is, and much like the pension board, if there are changes or services that may be enhanced, there's a body, a governing body made up of a diverse group of stakeholders that can be really a conduit to what's happening with regards to VALIC. And if there are opportunities for RFPs, et cetera, there is that body in place that can provide that oversight and varied perspectives.
Right now, it's just done administratively with the HR director and the manager, so we're opening up some accountability and getting other folks involved.
Okay, and one follow-up question on there. It says with the Aon actuarial services, one of the first thing that they're being tasked to do is to establish a retirement plan philosophy. And so it was some of that very broad, vague language that maybe wonder if at somewhere down the line with that philosophy, we could actually have some changes that would affect, say, our pension system.
Well, so one of the things we had done this past year was a study of actuarial liability, and it's something we're mindful of. And we want to look at different models for both defined contribution plans and possibly the defined benefit pension. And so we're just going to go through a process of studying those things. And we wanted to, when it comes to the defined contribution and deferred compensation plans, we wanted a group that could help field those just like the defined benefit side. So both bodies will be looking at different approaches. There'll be sensitivities done on different levels of actuarial liability. You know, we just want to make sure that, A, we have good, sustainable benefits for our employees that are meaningful to them. And so it's just like everything else. We're asking, why are we doing the things the way we are in full sight of everybody?
Commissioner Neesmith?
I'd like to delve into a little bit of what Commissioner Davenport was talking about. So we don't have we have a pension board now, right? But we don't have a defined compensation or compensation board, deferred compensation board. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So we don't have a history of how we would select employees to be representatives on that board at this point. On that board?
We do.
But I'm sorry, I'm confused. I thought we didn't have a deferred compensation board.
Not on that board, but on the defined pension board, we do
Right.
have a precedent of.
We have a precedent.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so how are the employees picked for that board?
The public safety representative is voted on by the public safety group.
Group, is that the two departments or the public safety department?
That's anybody involved, fire, police.
Right.
I think that.
And how does that person get selected by the group?
I think the HR facilitates sort of a survey.
A survey
Yeah.
of the employees?
That's sent out to all the employees within
Okay.
that particular body.
That seems
And
fair.
then Kevin Gentry, he's selected from the rest of the employees. So we have a public safety representative and everybody else.
And how are they selected? The
Also
everybody's?
by, I think, voting by the
It's
employees.
voting by the employees. Well,
Yes, sir.
That seems fair. I can tell you that I would not feel qualified as a commissioner to select an employee
Right.
to serve on the board. I know some employees, but just because I know them doesn't mean they're the best to serve. I think the employees are the ones who select people that are on the board, just as this precedent said.
I think these are good points. I mean, we've got a precedent. You know, we should probably follow that
Right. And
more
we also
closely.
have a retiree that serves.
And a
That
retiree.
serves
Is
on the
there
board
going to be a retiree on this board? I don't think so.
Is it,
There is actually,
Commissioner Hamby?
I guess I'm trying to figure out what the reasoning behind having this board is. We have the pension board. Is it, and several of the members are already on the pension board. Is there a reason why the pension board couldn't also be the deferred contribution board?
Well, this was HR's recommendation. Let us consult with them and we can respond to y'all,
Right.
everybody, on that question.
And as we move forward with this, I'd like to know the answer to that question. I'm just trying to, why do we need to recreate something if there's already a structure in place to do it? But, and I would agree with Commissioner Neesmith about employees perhaps designated. I don't know, it just gives them a stake in the matter. But any resident of Athens-Clarke County ought to be appointed, if this moves forward as it is, and any resident ought to be appointed by this board. Yeah, just because we represent the residents and the manager represents the employees. So, but I would argue that why could the pension board not also serve as the deferred compensation board?
Commissioner Neesmith?
I do want to say that I've had a good bit of experience with Aon, and they're top-notch. I mean, this is what they do all over the country, and they do a lot of it. So I think that's probably a good group to help navigate through these goals.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions about item number 2? Yeah, Commissioner Denson?
I guess, yeah, on going back to some of the list of things that they're going to do, that it says Aon is going to do, establish a retirement plan, philosophy, those things. So the way it sounds like to me is that this board, the deferred board, won't be doing that. That would be done by Aon, is that correct there?
Well, so they are the subject matter experts. They will propose certain things to the board, much like the defined pension board. It's an advisory body, so any material changes to any of our pension plans would occur as on advisement from either or both of these boards to the mayor and commission.
But this board is going to be involved then, though, in the creation of this philosophy and reviewing the current eligibility requirements, all that stuff. This board will be involved in that.
That's right.
Yes.
Okay.
Any other questions
Or
on
the
number
pension
2?
board.
You see where I'm going with it.
Oh, yeah, no, it makes sense.
All right, we're going to move on to fireworks. Item number 3, I believe Commissioner Hayward requested that this one be up for discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just ask if the attorney could maybe spend 30 seconds explaining the intricacies of this.
In 2016, the General Assembly adopted a comprehensive fireworks law that preempted any local regulation of fireworks. It allowed for fireworks virtually any day from 10 a.m. to midnight. There was a lot of pushback from local governments. So in 2018, the General Assembly made an exception to preemption and specifically allowed local governments to amend their noise ordinances, or actually readopt noise ordinances, to regulate fireworks between those otherwise permitted hours, 10 a.m. and midnight. And so that's what the ordinance does. It basically brings in the noise ordinance, sound regulations of 100 yards. That's just going to apply during those daylight hours and early evening hours. There still will be fireworks on July 4th, January 1st, some of those other days. That's a matter of state law, but that's what the change is.
And just to clarify, state law still makes it illegal to set off fireworks between midnight and 10 a.m., correct?
That's correct. State law covers that.
So
Commissioner Link?
Yeah, so does the state law prohibit us from banning the setting off of fireworks in certain zones? Or, I mean, my concern is that setting some of these off in really dense urban neighborhoods, I'm just waiting for something to go wrong in somebody's roof to catch on fire. Does state law prohibit us from coming up with those kind of regulations?
The only area of regulation you have is during the 10 a.m. to a midnight time frame, and it has to be a noise-based regulation. Now, you could tweak it as long as it's a noise-based regulation. But I don't know, it would be hard, maybe hard to figure out zones for that.
Okay.
That's
So
where your
it has
parameters
nothing to
are.
do with buildings within a certain distance from where they're setting off or anything like that?
No. Now, there are rules about you can't do it in the right-of-way and things like that.
Yeah, but if you have a backyard, doesn't matter if your neighbor's house is right up on your backyard, you can
That's right.
bombs away.
can I follow up on that?
Commissioner Hayward and then Commissioner Neesmith.
Just this, I don't know whether this would work or not, but if you're setting off bottle rockets and they're going from your property onto somebody else's, does that constitute littering?
It could.
Okay.
It could.
And how would that be prosecuted? I guess you need
Under
to
that ACC littering ordinance.
Okay.
Catch 'em.
But you'd have to have a police officer catch you, correct? Or code enforcement?
Code enforcement, I'll need to check with code enforcement to see if that's something they could do. I'll
That
let
might
you know.
solve at least part of the problem.
Commissioner Neesmith.
Mr. Attorney, is it conceivable that we could craft a noise ordinance that had distance limitations for fireworks?
There's something similar now in the noise ordinance about noise from commercial establishments adjacent to residential zones, so it's possible.
Thank you.
All right.
I get the sense that this board is anti-fireworks.
It's a tough day when we've come to that, isn't
One
it?
of us is particularly anti-fireworks on July the 4th.
That's because it scares you.
Do folks feel comfortable moving that back onto the consent agenda?
Yes.
Okay, we're going to move number 3 back onto the consent agenda, Gene. And then I believe Commissioner Denson requested item number 4 come up for discussion.
Yeah, so this was going to be for actually using a court that's in the county jail. And I was kind of surprised if this was already there, that we weren't already doing this. But I wondered if this was going to lower some of the needs that we were seeing, requiring us to get a new courthouse. Can y'all speak to that at all? How much this is going to be able to be? We're going to be able to move into that courthouse at the jail, or?
No, and it's not a very large courtroom. I wouldn't think it would have a material impact on the size of the potential new courthouse. But it is a use of existing space to help with the mitigate the issues that we're having now to some degree.
My understanding, Commissioner, speaking to Judge Lott, is that this is exclusively intended for preliminary hearings, and so this is going to prevent some unnecessary transfer between the jail and the courthouse, so we'll have some gains in that way, but in terms of the kind of grand scheme of the use of the courthouse, I don't think it'll have that big an impact.
Okay, so we'll cut down on the number of
Transfers.
that we're going to have to do. Okay.
And, Commissioner Hamby?
Yeah, and it's my understanding also from speaking to Judge Lott is that this came about because of the difficulty and Judge Lott being able to find a place to hold some of the bond hearings. I mean, all the other places were taken up, and she wanted to use this spot, but according to our ordinance, the Superior Court had not yet been designated to be able to use this facility as a place to hold hearings. So that's what we're doing here, is designating that so that could happen. So it came about because of a space consideration.
Sure.
Yeah.
Commissioner Neesmith?
Yeah, and I think we all realize, too, that this is only for non-jury proceedings, so it is just those preliminary hearings and those sort of things, so.
Commissioner Wright?
Yeah, and so once, if we vote on this and it moves forward, it can be sort of immediate with this additional court using it.
As soon as signed.
And then we would be able to have numbers after that to also learn how often it's used and the number of cases with that. When I toured the open house for the jail, I was impressed with it, but you could see that it was formal courtroom, but yet small and enough for specific proceedings. Like you
That's
said.
right. The other detail that I just recalled is that there were, up until this point, some folks who were having to be moved from the Clarke County Jail to the Oconee County Courthouse for some of these initial hearings, so should cut down on labor in that way. But can we move this one back onto consent? All right, perfect. All right, we're going to move on to item number 5. Commissioner Hamby requested removal of this item, establishment of neighborhood notification boundaries for Tanglewood.
Yeah, and we'll move this back to consent, but I just wanted to mention this is Tanglewood Neighborhood Association. They want to become a part of the neighborhood notification, but I also want to mention, this is in particular to Commissioner Neesmith, who shares some of the same concerns that I share out there with Timothy Road along Mitchell Bridge, but there's a meeting on April 3rd, Wednesday, April 3rd at 7 o'clock with several neighborhood groups along Timothy and Epps-Bridge Road. So just wanted to go ahead and mention that and get it out there, and everybody's invited, but just wanted to mention that, and you'll be hearing more about it.
All right, and 5's going to go back on consent?
Yes, sir.
Perfect, thank you. And then item number 7, the Georgia Initiative for Community Housing Report Acceptance. Commissioner Denson asked for some discussion regarding.
Yeah, I mean, for one thing, obviously, this is one of the biggest issues that not only this body, but the entire community is talking about, including last night at the Federation Neighborhoods meeting. So I think we'll probably end up getting more input as this goes forward, as we accept it. But I guess the big thing I have here, and I know this was talked about in some of our retreats, I know Commissioner Thornton brought this up, is how are we going to hold ourselves accountable to ensure that this report actually leads to meaningful action and results? That's really just a question I guess I'm posing to this body and to all of us, but we've seen way too often us accept these things, vote them in, and then collect dust. So.
One note I'll make, Commissioner, is I drafted a charge to the Planning Commission and to staff that I reviewed for the first time with the manager today. It said that we're making some tangible gains, particularly around the inclusionary housing concept and public participation and funding for some of those elements, too.
Thanks.
Commissioner Link?
Yeah, I have similar concerns because this GIC report is fairly focused on multifamily housing, low-income multifamily housing, when, you know, the affordable housing needs in the community and the need for increased home ownership kind of reach beyond that. And, you know, I'm concerned about things like zoning and land use. I know Atlanta is redoing its entire zoning code to allow for more density and accessory dwelling units and things like that. A lot of cities throughout the nation are completely taking a new look at their residential zoning categories. I'm glad to hear that there's some looking into inclusionary zoning, because we do have some developers who are voluntarily wanting to do inclusionary zoning. So that'll be good to have a process on the table instead of just kind of winging it like we've been doing. And I know that occasionally from time to time, we also talk about things like TADs and other tax mechanisms that could help encourage the development of new affordable housing. And I'm just wondering what opportunities moving forward we might have to discuss those potential solutions, because I feel like this report here is fairly limited and focused on one particular type of housing.
Commissioner.
So some of that will filter certainly through the Planning Commission and then come back to us. Of course, tomorrow night at our work session, we're having the broad overview of tax allocation districts, which again can be a mechanism for support for mixed income housing as well.
Are we going to have any opportunity to discuss zoning and land use and possibly, new residential mechanisms and density within existing neighborhoods and things like that?
Yeah, that would be part of the charge to planning, is to look at some of those by right opportunities so that the path can be as smooth as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Thornton?
I guess I totally fell into the old trap of having these reports, because I guess what Commissioner Denson said was my concern about the number 6, the Network for Southern Economic Mobility. So I won't go back, so I'll tie it to 7, since that's what we're discussing. We've been meeting and we got SPLOST plans coming. How do both of these tie into a real tangible project? So I'm trying not to go back on number 6, since I gave up the privilege of pulling it from the consent agenda. But how are we going to go back, or how are we going to be a part of the process of making sure these two, 6 and 7, are part of our work with tangible results?
So
how do we evaluate that?
One of the things later on the agenda that's there by title only at this point, but as part of the work session packet for tomorrow night, are our FY20 budget goals and objectives. So really, it's through allocation of resources, our staff time and funds, that we're able to kind of make the rubber meet the road. So these aren't just reports. They're things that we actually pull components of, and then we flesh out, and then we deploy through the community. So it really is that process kind of as we move now into our kind of FY20 budget prep. And then obviously there are component pieces that come back to us sort of item by item as we add additional elements to that work. So for example, if we take the idea about inclusionary zoning, there's the idea of density bonuses to encourage inclusionary zoning. That may be a chunk that we take care of. Another idea is auxiliary dwelling units, where somebody has a single family home, and under certain circumstances, they'd be allowed to put a second small single family home kind of in the backyard, and that could be another chunk.
So what is not on here, and I guess it's just moving by itself, is the Lexington and Atlanta Highway corridor stuff. I mean, that's another big chunk of something. So does it fit in this stuff, or when are we going to talk about that?
I discussed there sort of being an overlay between these things. So, some of the kind of access point discussion, some of the questions around multimodal access, bike and pedestrian access, some of the incentives that people could have to redevelop properties that have gotten sort of underutilized or gotten haggard. I mean, all of those certainly play in here as well.
So are you going to be expecting suggestions from this commission, or is these going to be recommendations that are going to come from staff? So
what I'd probably say is, sort of put this in the parking lot until tomorrow night's discussion of the budget goals and objectives. We've gotten that language from the manager based on our retreats. And so what we can do in that conversation is say, we want to dive a little bit more deeply into, the overlay between, use of what are now contemporary commercial districts and what in the future could be mixed-use districts, for example.
Okay.
So that'll be that chance to do that, and I think Commissioner Williams had a little bit.
Just a real specific answer to your question, Commissioner. So the GIC team did submit a SPLOST 2020 proposal for housing affordability that would be a funding source for any projects that this body would want to move forward with, and that would be feedback from mayor and commission, staff, iteration, so all of that's moving forward, and that's consistent with some of the goals that you've laid out at your retreat. And also for the Southern Network, they did not submit a project, but part of the key to increasing upward economic mobility is stability, of which housing is a huge part of that. So indirectly, the GIC team's proposal, if it's adopted by the mayor and commission ultimately, will help to provide resources to move those forward.
So as we move forward on, let's say, housing, we should be able, at the end of the day, if we do some housing, whatever that looks like, we should be able to go back and look at the GIC report and the economic mobility, and we should be able to put and say this came or was a part of the recommendations from these reports.
Exactly. These are informed assessments by citizens that spend a lot of time and a lot of their intellect helping to put these together as advice and guidance for the mayor and commission. Ultimately, it's your decision on how to prioritize and how to move forward.
Okay.
So the plan is behind us, but it's going with us as we go forward, and you get to help guide that.
Commissioner Neesmith.
Mr. Mayor, this isn't in any way to be a criticism of the mayor at all. But the fact is that the way these things move forward is the mayor prioritizes what's on the agenda. And he works with staff to determine what their workload is and what the priorities for staff is. There's a lot on the agenda. This mayor has a lot on the agenda. So I would say this is going to take some time, but I think, we talk to the mayor, we can encourage the mayor to do things, but as far as some specific actions that are reflected in this report, we're going to have to work with the mayor to get those prioritized and get them clear as action items for us to be able to do.
And, the kind of added element that I would note, Commissioners, is that, the planned series of mini retreats throughout the year, really are that kind of stop point opportunity to say, all right, we've taken some steps, now let's look around 360 degrees and assess, are these the steps we wanted to take? Do we want to pivot a little bit? Do we want to add some elements here? So we're really kind of in the first iteration of that process right now. Commissioner?
I totally understood the process, and I think my concern is that everything is not just process. We need to have product at some point. We need to have a milestone measure at some point. We do not need to be boggled down with the word. I just don't even like the word process, because we can't, because process looks like it never ends. The only thing I'm asking is that when things are at a point, when we hit a milestone, we're able to identify it and say it came from this part of the recommendation. So I totally get it, but I don't want us to be rolling and kicking the can down the street or the road for the next 4 years. Not for me.
Commissioner Hamby?
Thank you, Mayor. And I hear what you're saying, and I also think, though, that we can make a case about some of the things that have been done already with the Southern Economic Mobility and the GIC report. I mean, from what I remember about the GIC report, the focus was, and we ought to maintain this focus on the rental aspect of our housing, affordable housing situation. We can't lose sight of that, and I think that we're going to hopefully address that with SPLOST coming up, but hopefully we'll address it by looking at whatever type of incentives we can offer some private partners to do some affordable housing component. I mean, there's SPLOST, some incentives, but we also could look at, when we met during our retreat, we talked about the redevelopment of some of these corridors. On a lot of these corridors are some apartment complexes that need to be redeveloped. I mean, there's an opportunity there for us to look at the incentives within that to redevelop those. So some things are moving forward from that GIC report. We haven't seen the results of them yet, but we're putting in place the bones to make sure the results are there. And I would argue the same thing too for the Southern Economic Mobility Report. I mean, certainly this body, I think back to some of us that were on that, remember the youth development money, the $3.2 million that's out there, or $3 million that's out there for the land trust. I mean, what the land trust is going to do with that money is, a lot of that is addressed in the Southern Economic Mobility Report. And if the mayor and whoever else can help us get something going with West Broad, would be a perfect area for that to happen. I mean, that West Broad on Saturday mornings creates jobs for a lot of people. And that's economic mobility right there. The other part of economic mobility is what we're doing with Indigo. I don't know what the status is on that yet, but that's a part of it. So the bones are there to create that ladder where people can move up. And I know it. I get impatient too, Commissioner Thornton, and believe me, I'm probably the most impatient person on the board here. But that's a good thing. I mean, we play our role, and management plays their role in making sure that there is a process, whatever that is, but from that standpoint, and our role is to make sure that process gets sped up and that we do see the results, because we have to show something at the end of these 4 years to the people we represent. But that's not. But I say that in saying, I do see things happening within each of these categories that are going to really make a difference for this community. And once they start happening, and I'll say that I'm hoping they'll start happening within the year. And when they do start happening, they'll feed on other things to happen as well.
According to you, there are things that have already started happening. And you have that advantage over me.
Right.
So all I'm saying is, though, as we move forward, the things that you have identified, we should make it public and publicize.
Right.
Even the little things. I'm not asking for a big thing, but you named 3 things just a moment ago that I had no connection to the study or anything. So if the administration can make these connections, no matter how small they are, I think that is progress working. So I'm not banning process. I
Right.
just maybe educating us, because I did not know the things that you mentioned and made the correlation.
Commissioner Wright?
Yeah, and I think one thing that might help, that would be easy to help highlight the connectivity or the correlation, as Ovita's saying. Currently, in our agenda packet or any agenda report, the last comment before options is, these recommendations support the following mayor and commissioner strategic commitments. And that hasn't always been that way, but when it got added in there, and it allows it to be highlighted, how many of those strategic commitments are addressed by that agenda item. And it might be as simple as, at that point too, as pointed out in such and such study, as pointed out in this corridor study, and go ahead and what you say, get it out there so that the institutional knowledge that some of us have on seeing those connections, let's go ahead and spoon feed it and put it in there so that we can talk it up as being related to that, instead of, and the departments that see an agenda item or are working at that, they're the ones that are going to be able to highlight that easier than all of us. But, and if Mike's going to say something bad about what I said, don't call him. Because I saw, when he starts putting his hand up when you're not finished, you just know you've said
I'm going to allow
something.
Commissioner Hamby to say a positive comment, as I know that he will.
Well, I tell you, the former mayor always looked that way, so I didn't have to raise my hand very high. But this mayor, I mean, you have to like wave him down to see him. Just kidding, Mayor. But what I was going to say is this, and maybe there is a way where we can sort of add some structure to what Commissioner Thornton is talking about, maybe just on our website. When we have reports like come out like this, all you really need is the back recommendation page, put it up on our website, and you can have a checklist. This is done, this is done, this is done. Just have, as our progress reports on our website, as these reports are going through. If somebody wants to read through the whole report, they can look at it, but somewhere just have a checklist saying this is accomplished or this is being worked on and here's how it's being worked on and such as that. So, to your point, I think that's, if the public's paying for these studies, then the public ought to know what's being done with the studies. I agree.
Commissioner Denson.
Yeah, and building on that, actually, I like those ideas. And again, building into the structure we have of our process already. I think we have a really good process for, obviously, we get these studies done. They come before us. We have the whole report here and how we're gonna vote on this. And like Allison pointed out, the options and everything like that. I wonder if we could also create in that structure, create some space for us to review these things. I think that's what a lot of times is what doesn't happen. And I know we're going to be having these retreats happening a few times a year. So I wonder if we could almost kind of put a bit of a time frame out there. We're 12 months out of this, and we create a little bit of space for us to actually look back and look, has there been progress? What have we got out of this thing? Are we still following? Because I agree with Commissioner Hamby. This came out and said that it kind of changed our direction. We need to be focusing on rentals. That was a thing that we weren't doing. I'm kind of afraid that a year from now we forget about that and we go back to focusing on trying to do home ownership and we forget about the rental situation. So I think, and I understand why, because we're taking on a lot, we're doing a lot, and we're very forward thinking, and that is fantastic. And so I think it's even more important that we create some structure that makes us take a step back, look back at what we're doing, making sure we're still on that same path. So I don't know if we could somehow have that built into that structure somewhere, but I think that could really be a good way to do it.
All right. Everybody okay if we put number 7 back on consent? Sure. All right, 7's back on consent, Gene. We're winning tonight. All right, we're moving on to new business, and so now is the time when we were going to take public input on items number 8 through 15. This is new business. As with the last segment of items, you have 3 minutes for your public input. Please provide your name and address, and you'll have 3 minutes to address the commission. So again, items number 8 through 15 does not include zoning items.
I'm Kitty Myron. I live at 195 Pendleton Drive in Athens, and I'm also the executive director of the YWCO. And I'm here to address number 19, which is the CDBG funding. First of all, I want to thank the Commission for their past support of our YWCO Girls Club program, and it is to be approved from the HCD tonight. So I want to hope that you all will support that again. I don't know if you may not know, but Girls Club started back in 1976. And this will be our 44th summer that we've been able to offer the program. This past year, we had 294 girls. 29 of them were from the homeless shelter. 28 were from Pinewood Trailer Park. And 23 were from Athens Housing Authority homes. And we were able to give 156 total scholarships because we didn't want any girl to be turned away because of finances. But we are passionate at the Y about helping girls get the tools they need to succeed in life. And we do that mainly through our Girls Club program. And to tell you a little bit about it, it is held at Alps Road Elementary School for girls ages 5 to 14. And we have many, we have many activities, the regular traditional activities like swimming and dancing and singing and all those sorts of things. But in addition, we do so much more. They have reading lessons every day. They join the Athens Regional Library. And we also have worked closely with Goodwill, who does job training for the older girls, 11 to 14-year-old girls. They talk about how to make resumes, how not to get in trouble on social media when you're trying to get a job, how to interview for positions. It's a wonderful program we have with Goodwill. This year, through a grant from the Athens Educates, our 8-year-old girls are going to get to go to the Atlanta Center for Puppetry Arts, and then they're going to come back and with Wooten's Whippets, they're going to make their own puppets and they'll do their own performances. Our 7-year-olds, through a grant from USA Swimming Foundation, will get to have swim lessons. We hope to continue these programs for as long as we can get the funding. But there's so many groups that we partner with. We partner with the Clarke County Police Department. They come in and talk about bullying and summer safety. Clarke County School District, we work closely with them. We rent at Alps, we rent their buses. They have people who come in and speak. Athens Housing Authority and Geraldine, we work closely recruiting girls and getting the message out to them. And with their community council, they've actually given us a grant this year that's really helpful. The leisure services, we use the Clarke County pools for our swim lessons. So many, UGA, Athens Tech, Project Safe, the Athens Regional Library, so many. This summer, we're starting a new initiative, and it's called DER, Dear to Me, and it means drop everything and read. And we're going to have a special time every day when all the girls' groups, each class, will have someone read to them, their counselor or someone in the community. And I would like to invite each of you to come in sometime during our program this summer and read to the girls for just a few minutes. We'll have a book ready for you.
Thank you, Ms. Myron. We appreciate it.
And you can see your money, you're in work, your dollars at work.
Thank you so much. Any other folks interested in speaking to items number 8 through 15? All right, we're going to go ahead and move to commissioner discussion. First on item number 8, our calendar year 2019 pavement maintenance program. Commissioner Neesmith?
A couple of things. One is, I want to understand the budget information a little better. I know I already should, but we've got revenues that total $35 million, including the T-SPLOST and sub-projects of the T-SPLOST and GDOT LMIG. The $35 million, what period of time does that represent, Mr. Manager?
Get to that real quick. That's 5 years of the T-SPLOST, well, 4 years, remaining.
Remaining. Okay, that answers that.
And then.
And the expenses are this FY 2019. Calendar year 2019.
Yes, sir.
That's the budget for these projects.
That's right.
Okay.
And the SPLOST 2011, that's the remaining tiers, which would be this year and next year.
Right. So I have a comment to make. It seems that the more streets we pave, the more problems we cause, because people's neighborhoods will get paved, every street but theirs. And a lot of people look at street paving as one of my constituents says, it's like painting a house. You don't just choose which boards you're going to paint, you paint them all. I had to explain to them that it isn't a house, it's streets, and we pave them according to need. But what I find is that process it needs to be more transparent. As commissioners, we're able to sometimes find the rating systems or get the rating systems or the rating scores for streets sent to us, and we can take a look at that. I understand the ratings haven't been done since 2016. Is that right?
It's been a couple of years, yes.
Been a couple of years, so that's also problematic, I might add.
Well, we're transitioning to an automated form of rating the roads, which will, be quicker.
Yeah.
And
that's excellent news.
The objective.
I just wonder if we can make it a little more transparent, because as it is now, I like the rating system because it keeps it unpolitical. It's supposed to be objective so that a commissioner doesn't get to persuade to have his road on there when another road in town needs to be repaired worse, but that commissioner didn't raise enough stink. I want to see if we can come up with a more transparent way to show how we pick them for each calendar year.
Absolutely.
That's a request I have, because that's one of the, other than stormwater, right now, this takes an awful lot of my time. I'm not complaining, it's service, but I'd like to be able to be a lot smarter about it than I am now, rather than having constant dialogue with Transportation and Public Works to try to come up with the good answers.
Sure.
Okay.
Commissioner Link, did you have interest
Yeah.
in speaking?
I want to remind folks that, when this pavement maintenance list comes around, this is kind of the opportunity to evaluate some of these roads for bike lanes and traffic calming. So I want to encourage everyone to take a look at the roads in your district and reach out to staff to find out if there have been any evaluations of those roads and what possibilities there might be as the pavement maintenance process moves forward for improving those roads, some restriping, or this might be the opportunity for speed bumps for some of them. I've got a couple from my district, and it would be helpful if our district number was listed on this chart too, I think, moving forward. But I'll definitely be reaching out to staff on a couple of these.
Commissioner Hamby?
Sure. I was just going to talk about the dollars, the $35 million there, and I see where it's broken down here in several different categories as to where that's coming from. And I want to hone in on a particular number, that $711,000 that's coming out of the general capital carry forward. And I say that for us to just, think about that in these terms. I mean, we passed T-SPLOST, and we talked about this last year for some new ones that aren't on board yet. I think Commissioner Denson may have been at the meeting where we talked about, okay, now we have this source of revenue, T-SPLOST, that's helping pay for a lot of paving roads. Do we still need to rely so much, or even $711,000 worth on general fund monies going towards repaving roads? And I say that, I know we don't, at some point in time, T-SPLOST may not pass. I mean, and then we're kind of stuck. But based on what I heard and what we all heard at the retreat, and what we'd like to do for this community as far as investing in the human infrastructure, as Commissioner Thornton and I talked about, human infrastructure, we're going to need some money to do that. Stuff like the repaving in the buildings that can be taken care of by SPLOST, and now we have T-SPLOST. I mean, I'm just throwing that out there for us to consider. It's in here. I just want to make sure that if we come budget time, if we decide we're going to vote on this in April before our budget passes. So I just want to make sure that when we look at the budget and we're looking for some dollars to invest in that human infrastructure that we know we need to invest in, we can make that change then, I would imagine. Is that?
Well, if I could address that. So the paving number that was originally submitted was meant to catch up on the backlog, because we've been underfunding paving for some time.
Right.
And make us whole for 5 years going forward. As you know, there were a lot of requests for different things, so that number was pared back to only take care of the backlog. And so we are back while we're catching up on a lot of our roads, day one, we're still underfunding paving going forward, which we'll do another look back at T-SPLOST on the next go-around. So hence the need that we're continuing to put some capital funding in there to try to move that forward.
And I guess I would respond to that there's a backlog, but there's probably always going to be a backlog in repaving, because as Commissioner Neesmith points out, there always is going to be some road that we need to repave. And I guess I would argue if we take that $711,000 that's going towards repaving, because we've got the money in T-SPLOST to make up for it. It's going, it's a 5-year program here. It doesn't help with I see what you're saying, it doesn't help with the backlog, but the $711,000, if you invest in the human infrastructure side, does that help create the economic mobility where more people are paying into the system, that more people are paying into the T-SPLOST and SPLOST dollars? I mean, you see where I'm going with this. I mean, that would be an investment in helping to make somebody's life better, who then pays into the system. Right? Okay, that's all I need to say. Thank you.
Commissioner Wright?
Yeah, I guess I want to piggyback a little bit what Commissioner Link said was, I think that every year when this comes forward, the paving, that staff does look at these streets to come forward with the recommendation of.
For prospective conversion.
Yeah, I mean, that's built into the process, I think, as far as it's not commissioner-driven. It's
That's right.
staff evaluation-driven.
That's right.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
As it should be.
Commissioner Neesmith?
Yeah, that's as it should be. I'm just asking for more transparency so that I can explain the process to my constituents in a way that makes sense. Because unfortunately, for example, this year, or last year, there were some streets that obviously needed to be paved, and the neighbors, you were there.
Yes, sir.
Raised a lot of heck about it, and we have meetings. And this year, lo and behold, those streets are on the list. Now, one might think the commissioner did that. The commissioner didn't do that. Staff predicted that those streets would be on the list this year because it was the scores were such that they would be. But that's very difficult. I mean, the mayor's street got paved first. That's a coincidence. That wasn't because it was the mayor.
Not this mayor.
Not that mayor. No, your street will never be paved, Mr. Mayor. So I think also, as far as putting district numbers on the list, that gets to be political. I don't like that. I want to be able to trust the list, that these are the streets that need to be paved, and these are the streets that are going to be paved, and I can explain it. That's all. I mean, I can figure out what streets are in my district. That's not that hard. I've walked them all.
I'd just like to add for the folks that are watching, the citizens out there, that the tradition of this mayor and commission has been, there's equity and there's need. Equity would be doling up all the money in equal portions to the 10 districts, but the tradition here has been need. The streets that need to be paved regardless of location are the ones that go first. And so we have evaluative criteria that we go through, staff that goes through and recommend to the mayor and commission. And I understand what you're saying, Commissioner, and we can find a way to try to make that more transparent.
One more remark, if you don't mind. I want to take some disagreement with my fellow commissioner and friend, Mike Hamby.
I knew you would.
That, I'm concerned about our addiction to SPLOST for doing maintenance. We know that we fell behind on streets because of the economic crisis and the funding models that came out of the state. We weren't getting as much money. And so we fell about 8 years behind. I don't want the SPLOST money to become something that we have to have in order to maintain our infrastructure. We're going to have some degree of that all the time, I know, but let's not just assume that that's how we're going to do these projects. We need to be ready to wean ourselves from SPLOST. And of course, sales tax is a regressive tax. Don't forget that.
Commissioner Edwards?
I had a question about paragraph 5 with, said, under this funding, we're going to have a 17-year cycle of resurfacing as opposed to the 50-year cycle that we had pre-T-SPLOST. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So before the economic downturn, do you have any idea what sort of year cycle we were on pre-state funding cut?
So 17 years is about the life cycle for pavement. A little bit less on busier roads, a little bit more on less busier roads. And that's just that's a universal age for pavement. And of course, we try to make our pavement go a little bit longer when possible. You know the different treatments that we do to try to make that last, because there are other things that this government needs to spend funds on, so we try to make the pavement last as long as we can.
And I see we're going to be repaving 28 miles this calendar year. Is that correct? 28.3? Just for comparison's sake, to thinking about transportation, how many miles of sidewalk roughly might we construct this calendar year? I don't expect you to know the exact figure. I'm just curious, roughly, a rough estimate.
I'd have to go cobble that together, but I can.
Okay. Sidewalk and multi-use path, I'd be curious. And then finally, in the interest of transparency and efficient government, there are other municipalities that have apps where citizens can take pictures of potholes and it will automatically notify Transportation and Public Works with a geolocation. that I would like to know if we could implement something like that here to streamline the road maintenance request process.
That's something we looked at for several years now, and if you were to implement it, you might want to do it, one service at a time so that we can make sure that we can respond in an appropriate manner, because we would not want to, for somebody to make such a report and then take longer for us to get there just because of workload. So we really want to understand what type of capacity we need to be able to be responsive very quickly should there be a lot of requests.
Here's my camera.
Yeah.
Commissioner Harrod?
Thank you. I had a question. It was really more about the process of evaluate, since Commissioner Link brought it up, the process of evaluating streets for three-way conversions. And, we just recently had the mess that was the Barnett Shoals bike lane experiment. And there was a lot of ambiguity, I think, in our three-lane guidelines. And my understanding was that there was going to be some discussion on clarifying exactly that policy and how it would be implemented and when it would be implemented and some of the things that would be considered. So, for example, do we really want to three-lane a street that has a firehouse on it? And has anything happened with that process?
Well, that would be a policy issue, I would think, and something that perhaps we could work through a committee on to get a group of commissioners with staff to find out what the concerns are.
Okay, so nothing's happened so far, though?
No, sir.
Okay. I would like for us to, because that was a mess.
Commissioner Hamby?
Yeah, I was just going to say something real quick about potholes. And, anytime I've called a pothole into Gene or Citizens, those guys are there, like, sometimes it's the same day. It's very rarely a few days later. And so I had a couple instances last week where there were some potholes fixed, and I called Gene at, 8 or 8:30 in the morning, and they were there by 10 fixing the pothole. So at any rate, they're efficient, and anything you can do to help make it more efficient is even better. So.
Well, to Commissioner Edwards' question, our GIO has been putting together a vehicle, if you will, on how we implement that. Or it's an online, app's not the right term, but an online interface for citizens to do that type of reporting. We just have to see how we can implement it so that folks, in a way that folks feel like we're being as responsive as Commissioner Hamby.
I know I've heard C-Click Fix is one program that seems to be successful. And I know Chambly also has an app that they use.
And we actually built it based on our current Esri platform, and it's a service that's provided through Esri at no cost.
Oh.
And with the implementation of an enterprise license agreement, we were able to go ahead and build that structure and foundation already in place. And the GIO has worked and communicated with public information because we want to make sure we roll it out right. But on the back end, ensuring that once we it creates a work order. Who handles that work order? How is it distributed? And also that sort of folds into the use of our CityWorks software, which we are actually also in the process of rolling out to create that online geolocation-based work order system. So the foundation is already in place. It just has not gone proof of concept.
Commissioner Thornton?
I don't know how I can manage to agree with Commissioner Hamby and Commissioner Neesmith at the same time, but
You're in danger, sir.
But I understood what, and I really am glad that Commissioner Neesmith reminded us of the sales taxes being regressive. And, but if we have good paved streets and buildings and whatever we do with our SPLOST and T-SPLOST, and we do not have the manpower and resources to manage those, it's going to be like a desert. I mean, you're going to have this great infrastructure and still a bunch of poor people walking around. So there's got to be a way that we think about both of those things. How do we create jobs and build the infrastructure and not be reliant on the SPLOSTs. So I just wanted to make that comment because I do agree with Mike, but I don't want to be relying on any of the SPLOSTs for income.
SPLOST.
All of them. SPLOST, all of them. Oh, now y'all all gonna start arguing about this.
Mr. Mayor, when we go to that automated projections, we'll be able to provide a 5-year program of paving for Mayor and Commission consideration.
Commissioner Neesmith?
I just want to say, you know, for me, I think the idea of automating trouble reports or work orders is a great idea. But, you know, for me, just to my constituents, you call me, I'll take a picture, I'll put in a work request, and it'll get fixed. And, you know, I think we all feel that way. And I think it's probably the best way to do it if we've got commissioners, and we do, who are responsive to the needs of their constituents.
All right, so would folks be interested in being responsive to moving item number 8 to the consent agenda?
So be it.
All right, and so we're going to move on to item number 9, our fiscal year 20 Community Development Block Grant Action Plan.
Yeah,
Mr.
got a
Hamby?
comment about this, and this kind of ties in with the GIC and the social economic mobility report, and that when you look through the CDBG and certainly we have a lot of partners like the YWCO, and I'm not going to go through the whole list of partners, but within the CDBG money, we don't get a lot of money. It's a big sandwich, and everybody's taking a bite of it. No one's going to, you know, everybody's getting a bite, but they're still a little hungry for more. But the bite that they take enables us to address a lot of the things that are in the social economic mobility report, as well as within the GIC report. When we look at the folks who are helping with revitalizing some homes like the Land Trust and the Heritage Foundation and Habitat, I mean, what they're doing is basically helping people stay in their homes so that we don't see more gentrification happening, and that's a good thing. When you see folks like let me see here, I had it up and losing my thought about when you see folks like the East Athens Development Corporation, they're doing a program this year of nursing assistant training for 30 residents and phlebotomy, whatever that means. Veins, phlebotomies for 10 East Athens residents. I mean, that's going to help somebody get a job. They're also looking at East Athens academic program through the tutorial and Chesson community. Goodwill does micro-enterprise training for 30 low-income entrepreneurs and existing businesses. Goodwill's helping people develop a business so that they can make their own life and make their own living, and the Land Trust does the same thing. So I just say all this to kind of weave in what we had as a discussion earlier about this is a source of revenue that we do depend on. And hopefully our federal government recognizes that a lot of communities depend upon this money to do the exact same things that we're trying to build that human infrastructure part of it. So it's not just the government doing it, it's the partners in here that are doing the work for us, and they're very much appreciated in doing that.
Here.
Thank you, Commissioner Hamby. Any other input on our CDBG plan? Commissioner Link?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate how important these funds are, and these, you know, traditionally, these federal funds have been the only housing funds that we've had. I mean, we're starting to contribute more from our own funds, but it's not a lot of money. And, you know, I encourage folks to reach out to your congressional representatives to encourage that this kind of money stays, it continues. Currently, the president's budget does not recommend this funding. And it's not just our community, but communities across the country that would be in pretty dire straits without this money.
Any other input on CDBG? All right, can this move to consent?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, it has to have a public hearing. I apologize. Cannot. Item number 10, initiation of roadway abandonment for about 69 feet at the dead end of Overlook Drive. I think Commissioner Davenport, this is in your district. I don't know if you had any input on this item.
No.
Okay. Any other input on item number 10? Consent for that one?
I think that requires a public hearing.
Yes, it does.
I don't know.
Okay, not the initiation, but when it comes back.
The tail end. So this element can move to consent?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, item number 11 is our Americans with Disabilities Act transition plan. Any input on this item?
Consent.
Can we move this one to consent? All right. All right, item number 12 is the Human Resources Department request to implement new drug and alcohol ordinance and policy. Any input on this item?
I have a question.
Question?
So, it applies to certain people that do certain types of jobs, things like driving heavy machinery, that kind of stuff. So if somebody gets into an accident and they go for a drug test, not tomorrow. Oh, sorry. And they go for a drug test after being involved in an accident. And I don't really know how to ask this question because I don't know enough about the biology of how all of this works. But presumably they're being drug tested to make sure that they were not under the influence when they had the accident. But certain types of drugs, the evidence of having used certain types of drugs can remain in the system for a lot longer than you basically being high. So could you specify a little bit or clarify a little bit for me exactly how this works?
Well, when they say reasonable time, it means as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean a delay of a week or two. It's just the 2 hours was hard to meet all the time. And so just to be more, so that we adhere to the policy and the ordinance, we've made it to reasonable time with the understanding that it will happen as soon as practicable.
Okay.
Does that help?
And I can get further detail for that.
Commissioner Hamby?
I'd be fine with putting this on consent. I think I would imagine, Manager Williams, this probably has a lot to do with our insurance as well. I mean, I would suspect a lot of insurance companies require us to have some sort of policy in place like this.
Well, sure, our risk and safety, I mean, this is.
Right.
And really much of this is just becoming in compliance with state and federal guidelines as well.
Right.
Any other input on this item? Everybody okay moving this to consent? All right, number 12, Gina is going to move to consent. Number 13 is our Energy Sustainability Program, subproject number 6, solar for the Rocksprings Park Community Center. Commissioner Link?
I just want to say I'm really happy to see this item moving forward, and I want to thank the mayor for signing on to the 100% renewal pledge. And I look forward to seeing these panels go up at Rocksprings. And if it can go back on consent, I'm happy to see that.
Everybody okay with number 13 on consent? All right, number 13's moved to consent as well. We've just about switched all of the consent for non-consent, vice versa. Items number 14 and 15 are by title only. We've got work sessions both tomorrow and Tuesday, March 26th, that are going to address these items. And we're going to move on to planning and zoning, so I'm going to relocate. Planning Director Brad Griffin is going to come up, and we're going to lower the screen.
I noticed Jim Warrens, who does a lot of zoning issues, has grown a beard.
Yeah.
Don't know if he's trying to curry favor with Commissioner Denson or not, but it looks, or it's probably part of the retirement package. It's working.
All right, I think the first item is a request of Brett Nave, Studio B&A Architects. Folks might remember we're using a slightly new system. We're going to get the staff report, and then there's going to be opportunity for public input, and then commission discussion.
I'm all kind of out of sync here. Sorry. Okay. I go first, right?
Yep.
Okay, that's what I thought. All right, 3 items for you this evening. The first item is a request at 220, 280, 290 William Street, and 2 addresses on Baldwin. There is a land use change from general business and Main Street business to downtown. as well as a request to rezone from a commercial general plan development to a commercial downtown plan development within the River Design District. 4 parcels included in this. This is basically the Blind Pig property, and as it turns and goes up under the railroad on Baldwin Street. There's 5 mixed-use structures included in it, all connected internally, a mix of uses, a lot of retail, restaurant-type uses. Really, the entire frontage as it wraps the street is all retail ground floor with residential over the top. And as we move back up the hill behind, we go to pure residential, which leads us into some of our waiver-required requests that are going forward. 208 total bedrooms on about 3 acres in a CD zone represents about 30% of what they could develop under the commercial. It's about 70 beds an acre instead of 200. So it is not a maxed out type of development residentially, but it is a full mixed use with 18,000 feet of commercial retail space, 2 points of access, one off of Mitchell and one off of Williams. You see there the waiver for the 77% of ground floor for the parking, and a lot of this is just based on the topography and the way this property would be developed into the side of a hill, and then the elimination of a landscape buffer along the abutting residential district. This is due largely to topography, the extreme topo change between the 2 properties. You see the property here outlined in red, and then the land use as is on the left and how it would change to the downtown land use, which you see is really picked up across Mitchell Street and is a continuation. And then the proposed zoning change would also take it to a commercial downtown district, which really is not an isolated district from what we currently have between Mitchell and Oconee as well. The overall master plan, and then some artist renderings, kind of elevations of the architectural flavor. You can see that bottom right picture kind of gives you a feel as you're coming up, and Williams transitions into Baldwin and turns and goes up the hill and under the railroad. Existing conditions, some elevations. A lot more information in your packet in terms of their report, and just kind of moving through these fairly quickly. Planning Commission recommendation is to approve both the land use plan modification as well as the zoning with some conditions. A lot of this was dealing with kind of some last minute concerns from egress, primarily off of Mitchell Street based on topography, and that has been addressed, and the plans that you have in front of you represent an engineering design that will allow the trucks to get into the parking area off of Mitchell Street. And then just some minor changes. One of the bigger ones that we included for Planning Commission consideration was that you do see within the proposed plans a lot of trees. Technically, those trees are not required as part of a downtown design, and we're not technically on one of the sheets within the plan set, but we are asking that all of those trees be honored as part of this proposal, and that they work with the arborist as part of the permitting process, if approved, to ensure compatibility with appropriate species. One other waiver that was added kind of last minute, some really small units in a few of these areas. They're looking at some affordability options with that. I think they go all the way down to a little less than 300 square feet on a few of their studios within the overall development. That's a condition about the tree management plan, of which they've certainly agreed to, and with all of that, the recommendation was to approve.
All right. We've got 3 minutes per public input opportunity. Brett, come on.
Brett Nave, 200 Plum Alley. I'm with Studio B&A Architects. Since we're really excited to be able to work on this project with Ken and John and Susan. They're Ken Parker. I think most everybody here probably knows them. They've been here for 30 years, and they're one of the first things they said, if not the first thing, is John said, we want to make a project for Athens. It's about Athens. not, it's not a giant megalith student housing project. It's a project for anyone and everyone. And that really has been our approach. You're seeing studios 1s and 2s and a lot of retail. We're taking advantage of the fact that the Greenway jumps from the river to the street here and passes along Williams, and it's transitioned into Baldwin. And we're inviting, there's several moments where plazas pull off of the sidewalk and into little courtyards to invite people to engage and stay in the retail cafes and shops that are being proposed. And as Brad mentioned, about 18 to 20,000 square feet there of that. And we're really focusing on the idea of live work. The vast majority of the tenants that residents that the Parkers work with are across the spectrum, from workforce to young professionals, people that work in my office, to a few grad students and an occasional student. So we think that this is really for everyone here. I think in your packet, I believe there's a lot more renderings, so hopefully you can see some of the integrated spaces for pedestrians and interactive use from the retail to the residential. One of the most recent things, as I probably am running out of time here, we are working on an affordable aspect for this project. Commissioners Wright and Commissioner Link, as well as Heather Benham at the Land Trust, are helping us coordinate together to hopefully come up with, I think the word we kind of coined on Friday was a pilot of sorts, that we can come up with a mechanism when we have, the Parkers are absolutely interested and willing to make this truly a project for everyone. So I think with everyone's help, Planning Commission and the Mayor's Commission, will be able to come up with something that could hopefully can be an example of how, basically a mechanism, an example for how this can work here in Athens. So, see.
Thanks, Mr. Nave. Any other input on this item from the public? All right, we're going to go ahead and come to commission discussion. Commissioner Wright?
Yeah, thank you. I did enjoy meeting, and Commissioner Link and I were able to get some questions answered. If you have time to look through the whole packet, it's very extensive, and it seems like they're doing all the right things for all the right reasons, including the courtyard on the inside. Brad, can you go back to that line drawing that was showing that surface parking in the back? And just to be clear, the whole waiver for the parking deck being on the ground floor, it's underground in the back. And technically, it's ground level on the front. Brad, am I describing that right?
You can find the arrow here on the screen. The first level of the parking deck enters off of Williams, I think here, right in here somewhere. The second level, the two levels do not interconnect internally, which gives them the ability to put more parking in the deck. Second level comes in right here. All of this area that you see that is rooftop green space is deck 2 levels down below it. So it's internal. This is surface parking as it appears, and then the issue with the driveway grade, that's existing condition that will have to be significantly modified for emergency access, and they have worked all that out, and we're comfortable with the design.
Yeah, and I really appreciate, I think it's a brilliant design for this, literally a little island tucked between the railroad track and the other roads. The condominiums that are outlined there, they're working on, I think by leaving that surface parking lots, it's less impact and change. They're going to do some landscaping and some improvements with that, but it makes it accessible. A lot of people don't like to do parking decks, and one of the things I liked was the diversity of that. So people driving up, they are at ground level to walk in to different things or get to additional parking. I think 2-bedroom, 2-bath is the largest unit, and then the fact that they've got the multiple studio units inherently makes them an affordable price just by the way they're designed and built. And then to be able to work with Heather on what might be able to be a way to also pair them up and have this in inventory that she can help them with residents. They're looking on that because that's how they want to do it, as far as being a pilot, that we don't have any rules or things around that, but she has experience in teaming that up. And so they're going to work on that. And I appreciate that as well. So, oh, and then you guys know how much I love a rooftop bar and grill. I think I'm finally getting one in my district if this goes forward as planned. But they've got a lot of, the other thing I appreciate is the sidewalk welcome effect, to where you can walk into, you can see it over in the bottom right area, you walk into what is a sort of a mini plaza, and then the entrances to the retail are within that. So it has different welcoming areas besides just a door to retail, and it increases, to me, the flow from the sidewalk tree-loving Commissioner Link to the sidewalks and in, as well as parking on the street. So it covers a lot of diverse things, and glad to see it.
Commissioner Link?
Yeah, I've kind of been watching this project move through the system. I was at the first Planning Commission meeting where they proposed the concept, and Jerry and I were both at the one where they got approval last week, and repeatedly the developers talked about, wanting to maintain affordable units and to appeal to, our workforce housing. And so, I pulled Allison in after fresh from her surgery. The painkillers hadn't worn off yet, and reached out to Heather Benham at the Land Trust, and we were able to meet and talk about that possibility. And I really look forward to what they come up with a voluntary inclusionary zoning program for this project. And aside from that, there's a lot to like about this project. It's very thoughtfully done on a weird piece of land with weird topography. But they're doing all these, really cool green things. The solar panels on the roof, the green roof over the parking deck. You don't even know there's a parking deck under there. Those courtyards from the sidewalk, the trees and the wide verge. This runs parallel to the greenway, and it becomes a part of the greenway. And I also, I like the kind of incremental design of the buildings. You don't have just a bunch of homogeneous blocks. These buildings are different sizes. Some of them are 2 stories, some are 3. You've got the retail kind of wrapping around, and that retail meets the sidewalk. Our current downtown codes don't necessarily mandate that. That's why you see all these weird little ramps up to doorways downtown in some of our new buildings. But here they're not doing that. They're actually stepping up the building, so you actually walk straight into the retail from the sidewalk. And I'm hoping that's something that we can think about in new design guidelines, is follow the lead of a development like this, and ensuring that our new buildings in downtown actually do meet the sidewalk and invite passersby in. There's just, I could go on, but I feel like this is really, really thoughtfully designed, with pushing all the right buttons in a lot of ways.
Commissioner Neesmith?
Well, I'm going to pile on in a positive way here, too. I want to commend the architect, the designer, the developer, the ideal persons for this. This is one of those developments that you just love to love. And I won't go in through, you guys did a good job describing what it is. But I'll just say that I'm excited about this. This is going to be a beautiful addition to our town. And the attitude of Mr. Nave and the rest of them about it being affordable workforce housing by its very nature, its size, the size of the units, it is that. And then working with the Land Trust is just a wonderful idea. I really look forward to the results of that. I think it's going to be great. Thank you.
Commissioner Harrod?
Thanks. It looks nice to me. I don't really have a problem with it. I do have a question, though. Is this going to be rental? Is it going to be condominiums, owner occupied? What's the
Rental.
All of it? Okay.
So experience with managing property is part of the team.
Commissioner Hamby?
Thank you. And I will say this, it is an impressive project and done some good work with it. And I do appreciate the willingness to look at the affordable housing component of it. And I guess I'll say this, if this project moves forward and they do put the affordable housing component in there, and then all of a sudden we come up with incentives for affordable housing, I hope we can kind of re-examine what this project has done. And if future projects are getting incentives, I don't know what they could be, tax abatements or something I don't know what it could be. But I would like for us to look at this project in that respect and see if we can retroactively, they're looking at it before we even have a policy in place, before we have a structure in place, and there's something to be said for that, and some benefit should come to somebody willing to do that. So,
Commissioner Thornton?
If this project moves forward, is this an example of, is this a connection to the GIC proposal?
I would generally say that probably some of the same things that inspired the GIC work kind of were inspirations behind this.
I just want to know.
I would say the fact that they're looking at they're not looking at a 4-bedroom, 4-bath. No, I understand. To help answer, or that's the way I see it. They're not looking at that component. They're looking at components that would fit into affordable and workforce housing with 2-bedroom and studios and such as that. So, and that's something that the GIC report has recognized as being an important component as well.
I'm trying to show I'm very supportive.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
You got it. Well, and also, if I recommend before we vote on this for you guys to go check out what is currently there as well. And it's sort of outdated where I think the door to the apartment is already exterior, and that's really not 21st century safety sort of protocol. And we're moving to a current version of what people seek, I think. So it's an improvement for sure.
And some of these units do have our ground floor and entry because they're on the courtyard or the parking deck rooftop. So there could be some disability access to some of the units, which you don't always get in these high-rise, urban apartments.
Sounds like we need to put this on consent.
That'd be great. I think there's rules against it.
Any other commission comments? All right, we're going to move on to the next item. We'll get that presentation from Brad first.
All right. Next item is an amendment to commercial downtown zoning with conditions at 141 East Broad Street. Straight rezone, modification of conditions imposed as part of the previous zoning of this property. No change to the land use required. It effectively removes existing conditions and proposes one condition be placed that deals with the setback along the western property line of this property. Currently, there are conditions in place that deal with height, that deal with setbacks on multiple sides. There was a kind of a box drawing that was submitted as part of the zoning. And you've got some pretty extensive history in your staff report in terms of the history of zoning on this property, so I won't go into all of that. But there was a 10-foot setback along the western property line all the way up, in part to ensure that any development on this property would not build adjacent to the windows of the existing condominiums to the west. They need the separation for air and light. And really what is being asked here is to remove the condition in order to allow a ground floor retailer to connect both properties all the way across. But then once you get beyond the first level, you go back to the 10-foot separation the rest of the way, so it would not impact those residential units moving up the eastern side of the property to the west. I see the property here. There in the hatched area is the 10-foot. There's going to be a requirement regardless. The access to the condominiums is right here, so they have to maintain ingress and egress up and in at this point. Where the connection would occur is from that point back. And then there are also requirements for alley egress that show up on a plan that I'll get to in just a minute. But there again, you can see to the left, that is the entrance to the existing condominiums. This was the binding axonometric drawings that were submitted as part of the last rezone, with the understanding that any ultimate development, and that still stands today, has to be approved by the Preservation Commission, which is why it was approved in this format then. These boxes would be eliminated if this were to be approved as recommended. And there you can see the connection. You see the access here that still would remain open and leading into the entrance to the condos, but the ground floor would connect all the way across and out on both sides for a single use. And then you see in the green to the top and working east and out to Broad Street, a modified alley design that the applicants have met with property owners. I think Mr. Warrens will go into this maybe a little more in just a second, but they've also met with our fire department in terms of opportunities to clean up that existing alley and make it an improved egress out. So with those things, the recommendation from the Planning Commission is to approve with the condition that the 10-foot building setback from the western property line should be required for all floors above the ground floor. And it was a unanimous vote.
This is in Commissioner Link's district.
Yeah, is there public input?
Oh, I
on this?
apologize. Let's go ahead and get public input on this item. Thank you. Jim Warrens is here, although he's barely recognizable, as somebody noted earlier.
I'm almost retired. My wife laughs when I say that. My name is Jim Warrens. My address is 244 East Washington Street. There's 4 things that have to be done to be able to develop this parking lot. To start with, all of the ground floor, all the commercial space in University Towers is owned by the same entity that now owns the parking lot. The 4 things that have to be done is, number 1, this rezone has to be approved. Number 2, this is an easement all the way back, and it's written into the condominium documents. And so that easement is going to have to be rewritten. There are other elements of the condominium documents that have to be changed in order to allow this connection in the back. The proposal is to make this a covered walkway with a gate out here or some kind of door with probably a key punch to provide for security. This will be covered so that people coming in off of Broad Street to go to the condominium will come in a covered entrance and go into their elevator lobby that currently exists. The second thing is that this alley has also been it's in the courthouse since 1926, but it's not as clear as it ought to be. So the easement documents for the alley have to be reaffirmed, mainly because this building right now exits and comes out across the parking lot. So the alley has to grant them an easement. The area that's in green is at least 6 feet wide, except for 2 points, I think right there and maybe right here, where it's 5 feet wide. That was discussions with the fire marshal of wanting to clean this up and having what he described as a clearway of at least 5 feet, which is going to entail moving some of these heating and air conditioning units probably up to the roofs of these buildings. This fire staircase is currently in this area right here and pretty much blocks the alley, so it'll have to be relocated out here. We've been negotiating again with all these surrounding property owners to make these changes. They're excited about this project. Of course, the work's going to be done at the expense of the developer, so they're going to get better access, emergency access back here and get all this cleaned up. And then the 4th thing that has to be done is, of course, this is in the downtown historic district, and so whatever eventually gets built on this parcel is going to have to be approved by the Historic Preservation Commission. At the present time, we don't have any plans because until we can get the zoning and the easements worked out, we don't spend the money to develop a plan to go to the HPC. But that's where this is, and we would ask for approval of the rezone to do away with the conditions so that this parcel can be developed in accord to what we've outlined here. And I'd be glad to answer any questions that anybody might have.
Thanks, Mr. Warrens. Any other public input on this project? All right, moving on to commissioner input. Commissioner Link, this is in your district.
Yeah, this is kind of a no-brainer. You know, there's a lot of things that need to happen before the lot can get developed, and I'm happy to know that it's in the historic district, so the design of that new building will undergo a pretty rigorous review. And that, you know, they'll actually probably be improving the access for the existing residents, and that is a condo association, so there's been communication, and they have to get approval with the condo association, so there's certainly been some citizen input in this all along the way. I mean, I think it makes total sense to see this move forward.
Commissioner Harrod?
I have a question. So the bit inside the circle where the new building will be built, how tall is that? Is that the 50 feet? And what does that mean for the view of the people in what was the old parking deck?
The short answer to that is that we don't know the height of the building. This one's a little bit different in that the owner has acquired all of this property. They are in negotiation with the major retailer for a long-term lease. Depending upon what the ultimate terms of that lease are is going to go a long way toward dictating what happens in here. They are very cognizant of needing to provide something that's attractive for the folks that live in these units. As Ms. Link said, and as we fully recognize, because we've got to get this easement released, or at least this portion of it released, this part will probably stay there. There's extensive negotiations going on with the condominium folks, because in addition to the easement problem, there's some other provisions in the condominium documents that are going to have to be amended, which is going to require 80% of the folks that live over here. So they've got to be satisfied at the end of the day, but I don't have any details to specifically.
I guess my question is, so let's say it's a multi-story building, 4 stories, 5 stories,
Right.
whatever. So the people that live on
this side right here?
Yes.
Okay.
That currently can look out of their window and look over downtown, will they suddenly be faced with a brick wall?
The ones that are high enough to overlook downtown will probably not. The ones that are on the second and third floor basically look at the side of this building over here. So it's just that whatever wall is there will be moved closer to them. The discussions that I've been a part of is that they're probably looking, maybe, and I hesitate to even mention this, but they may be looking at 4 stories here. But that, right now, quite frankly, we don't know.
Okay.
But from what I understand of the economics that are involved in this, it probably won't be more than 4.
It will or will not?
It will not.
Okay.
But I can't stand here and tell you that, Mr. Harrod, because it hasn't been designed yet.
Okay. Because, I mean, my understanding is that some of those units at least are individually owned.
The condominium units are almost all individually owned. Now, a lot of them are rented out to students or absentee landlords. I have a little bit of knowledge in that because the tax folks last year increased the taxes on here, and I represented a number of owners and sat with the tax assessor. And I mean, we looked at the whole schedule, who all owned it and where they are and so on. So there's very few folks that own and live in there. There's a few, but not a whole lot.
Okay, thank you.
Other input?
I have a question about this. Is this remember years ago, there was a project that came forward to us, and I don't remember the gentleman's name. I want to say Bob something.
Segrist.
Yeah, there you go. Is this the same piece of property that we approved back about?
Those were, yes. That was part of what.
You may have said that, and I wasn't listening. Did you say?
It was an old PD, and it's in your report. It's an old PD, and part of the Segrist proposal was to drop the PD, place some conditions on it in conjunction with this, in part because it was now in a historic district.
Right.
And it had that level of review. It's been a PD. It was a PD for many years prior to that, basically for a parking lot.
Yeah, and I think he went all through the HPC process as well.
I think so. It took 2 or 3 times through this process before it was finished.
Right.
Well, and I know when I was first on the commission, we looked at this, and I looked back at the paperwork, and that was about 2000, it says 2009. So this is not the first time that it's come with us. But I know that one of the issues back then was the view shed for people living in what is, what was that old parking deck that's now the condominium.
That's right.
I recall angles being created so that you wouldn't lose very much view shed there. Any other input on this item? All right, Brad's going to move on to the final.
Okay,
planning and
one
zoning item.
more, a straight rezoning request, 785 Highway 29 North and 150 McClung Road from commercial general, commercial rural, and single-family residential to commercial general. It's 2 parcels, about 26 acres in total. No proposed use at this point, straight rezoning. There's 3 zoning classifications on the property right now, and I'll explain that a little more as we move through, but no voluntary use restrictions or development restrictions have been put in place by the applicant at this point. Here you see the property just across from the Kroger on Highway 29, and there's been more development in here since this aerial was taken, but this is going to be Popeyes, and I think this is Bojangles. I think. A lot going on out there right now. The zoning classification, you see this property currently three zones. The frontage portion of it here is already commercial general, commercial rural, which was the majority of this property at the onset of our ordinance back in 2000. A lot of this was all CR at that point. You see some of it has changed through the years. The red on either side of it is already commercial general, and then a small area of single family to the back. And you see the proposed change would take the entirety of the property to commercial general, which would be compatible with the future development map here, which is general business. The overall property, the current RS zoning line really follows this creek at this point. There's a lot of floodplain in around that creek, a lot of floodplain to the west of it. One of the initial concerns when you would look at this type of a commercial general rezone that pushes all the way back and abuts residential zone property is potential impacts in that transition. Between floodplain, and the Planning Commission talked about this at length as part of their deliberation. There's so many restrictions in terms of creek crossings, floodplain, really the inability to develop. There's one little piece of this overall property, which is this right here, that actually is up out of the floodplain. I think there, you can see it again there. Highly, highly unlikely that it would be cost effective at all to do a creek crossing and the mitigation of the floodplain and everything else to get back into that corner, given its size. And so it really is going to serve as a natural buffer, and may very honestly, as part of development, it may be considered as some type of a conservation use long-term. But the applicant right now, in order to look at future development, is asking to make it one zone under the commercial general classification, which is on either side already. Planning Commission reviewed it. They looked closely at that issue with the RS-15 transition. In the end, they were comfortable with the request and recommend approval. I think it was a unanimous vote.
Public input on this item?
Hi, my name is Kevin Bear. I live at 1020 Christian Lane in Watkinsville. I'm with W&A Engineering, and I just wanted to let you know that if you have any questions for myself or the owner, Mr. Alan Neese, we'll be here to answer any that you may have. And just to reiterate on the area on the back of the property, we are currently investigating putting that in a conservation easement. It's a little tangled to do something like that, so there's a lot of hoops we have to jump through. But we're working with Stephanie Thompson over there to see what we need to do to possibly put that into a conservation easement. Pretty much everything from the floodplain back would be in a conservation easement. This is just unbuildable land, and getting back to that little corner would, as Brad said, would be very cost prohibitive. So if you have any questions, we'll be here to answer those. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Bayer. Any other public input? Commissioner Thornton, this is in your district.
I do know the area quite well, and the growth in that area is booming. I do like the idea of considering a conservation plan, and I support moving forward.
Any other questions, comments from commissioners? Commissioner Link?
Yeah, so this is just the rezone. There's no actual plan for development.
That's
yet.
correct.
Okay. And CG zoning would still allow for some residential if they were to choose, what is it, 25 bedrooms per acre?
CG would allow for 24 bedrooms an acre,
24.
second floor in a mixed-use proposal, or it would allow a special use request to be brought forward to you to seek ground floor. It is 24 beds an acre.
And if we were to, in the near future, come up with one of those incentive packages or some kind of voluntary inclusionary zoning package where we offer density bonuses, I'd just suggest this might be a good place to do it, considering there is so much commercial and retail around there, that this would be a ideal location for some workforce housing for people who might work in some of those businesses and have easy access to grocery and all that.
Commissioner Thornton?
Please move him. I do want to reiterate the conversation we had, I forgot which meeting, about that whole Thoroughway being a welcoming area that almost grew by itself. So that's another reason, if there's potential in the future. I do think that this is the best time because that area is growing, and I could see it as being very valuable.
I was just going to add, and we oftentimes want to be real cautious about doing a straight rezone without looking at any sort of plans in place. But with this one, I'm okay with it, just simply because, as Ms. Thornton, Commissioner Thornton has said, I mean, this is a really happening place for Athens-Clarke County. It's becoming a really boom for a lot of things, but and things are happening so quickly out there that I think this approving this rezone makes sense because of the nature of how things are happening so quickly out there.
Commissioner Denson?
Yeah, I'll also just say, the conservation easement in that whole situation makes me feel a lot more comfortable about that straight rezone too. The only thing I wanted to bring up was I was thrown off at first when I was going over the agenda a couple days ago because it has it listed as Highway 219 North. And I was desperately trying to find US Highway 219 North. So that's just on the actual agenda item, so I just want to make sure that gets corrected.
Andy, it looks like Commissioner Denson's replacing you as the wordsmith person to catch the.
I felt like that wasn't a Commissioner Herod kind of thing, yeah.
Yeah, he's dropping the ball.
We've learned skills from one another. I had a quick note, Brad. I've had lots of conversations with folks interested in various kinds of development, both commercial and residential, in this area. Given that Trail Creek would kind of have this wide buffer, obviously given that it's a perennial creek stream, so you'd have 75-foot buffer there. And you could prospectively connect Country Corners and Pine Woods really with Athens Technical College. I might be interested in some conversation, maybe with you, Commissioner Thornton, and maybe Mr. Bayer, about the prospect of having an easement for a multi-use path kind of along this Trail Creek area too. So if you'd be open to that, I'd like to talk in the coming days. Okay. Any other questions or comments? All right, that is it for agenda setting. And remember, we've got an executive session with a single item that will follow. 2 items.